changing doesn't mean becoming someone else. I used to think change meant reinvention. That if I hated where I was or felt stuck in myself, the answer was to build a new identity from scratch. New habits, new style, new goals, a whole new me. But every time I tried, nothing stuck. Because here's the thing, changing doesn't mean becoming someone else. It means finally turning toward the parts of you you've ignored, avoided, or forgotten. The ones that never had space. The ones you silenced just to survive. The ones that didn't fit the version of you the world made room for. Those parts don't vanish. They go underground, waiting. And when you've been living as a fragment long enough, life starts to feel hollow. You might smile, work, check the boxes, but deep down you know you're playing a role. You start mistaking the mask for your real identity. Most of us learned this early, which emotions were acceptable, and which ones got us punished, which dreams felt safe to speak, and which ones we buried. How to smooth out the edges of who we were so people would let us in. That's survival. It works until it doesn't. At some point, you wake up and realize the very thing that once kept you safe is the thing keeping you stuck. True change is the reverse of that fragmentation. It's not about adding more skills, stacking achievements, or layering on yet another mask. It's about peeling back the adaptations until you can finally stand as yourself, unmasked. That's terrifying, by the way, because the world around you was built to reward the version you've been performing. To stop performing means risking rejection, breaking out of systems, losing the approval you built your identity on. But it's also the only way to feel free. Spiritually, it's like a return home. That line, peeling back everything that is truly you, echoes something I've seen across traditions. Awakening isn't about collecting enlightenment. It's about stripping away illusion. You don't have to become. You have to realize you already are. And what you've been told were flaws, your sensitivity, your anger, your desires, your creativity, are actually the foundation of your authenticity. They're not defects. They're the pieces of yourself you've been missing. To live this out, you have to acknowledge the parts you buried, claim them instead of disowning them, let them lead, even if it costs you the comfort of who you've been. Because real growth doesn't always look like addition. Sometimes it's subtraction. Sometimes it's unlearning. Sometimes it's remembering that who you are beneath the masks has always been more than enough to build a life around. Why change works this way instead of becoming someone else. The question that always comes up here is why. Why can't we just start over clean, reinvent ourselves completely, and leave the old version of us behind? It sounds appealing, the fantasy of erasing what we hate and building something brand new. But it never really works that way. One, because you can't actually erase yourself. No matter how much you reinvent, the self you've been avoiding doesn't disappear. The anger you muted, the sensitivity you numbed, the dreams you shelved, they leak out in other ways, through burnout, anxiety, depression, or emptiness, through patterns that keep repeating, even when you try to start over, through that nagging sense that something is missing, even when life looks successful. Trying to become someone else is like painting over cracks without fixing the foundation. Eventually, the old layers push through. 2, because survival comes at a cost. The reason those parts were ignored or silenced is usually survival. As kids, or even as adults, we learn quickly. This side of me isn't welcome. To fit in, we amputate pieces of ourselves. But survival strategies don't go away when the threat is gone. They turn into lifelong masks. The why of this passage is pointing out that real change means undoing survival patterns, not just layering new ones on top. 3, because growth isn't addition, it's subtraction. We live in a culture obsessed with adding new skills, new habits, new identities. But if the foundation is built on self-rejection, all that addition just hides the real problem. That's why real growth often looks like peeling back, not piling on. Subtraction instead of addition. Letting go instead of always reaching for the next upgrade. What you find underneath isn't broken. It's the self that was always enough, the self you abandoned. 4, because authenticity has energy. When you live as a mask, it drains you. Every smile, every yes you didn't mean, every performance takes energy. When you turn toward the parts you buried, it frees that energy. That's why people who reclaim their voice or creativity often feel a surge of vitality. So the why is practical. Living aligned with your real self literally costs less energy than pretending. 5, wholeness equals power. A fragmented self is unstable. The parts of you that got cut off don't just disappear, they fight from the shadows. You spend energy battling yourself, suppressing, keeping the lid on. But when you finally claim those exiled parts, the too sensitive, the too angry, the too different, and let them exist, you stop fighting yourself. The war inside ends. That's when you can build a life that actually feels solid. That's the power of wholeness. In short, you can't become someone else because the old self never goes away. Real change isn't about erasing, it's about integrating. Ignoring yourself costs you, reclaiming yourself frees you. That's why the real work of change feels less like invention and more like coming home. From reinvention to discovery. For most of my life, I shrank myself to feel safe. Assimilating was easier than standing out. I thought if I kept myself small, quiet, and contained, I could avoid rejection or judgment. So I built a bubble of limitations around me. I became rigid, insecure, afraid to be myself, not because I didn't have dreams, but because the dreams scared me. The world scared me. Even I scared me. It felt safe. But really, I was a prisoner of my own self-conception. I was constantly projecting what I thought the world would think of me, denying myself before anyone else had the chance to. Some of it came from fear, some from past experiences, but the result was the same. I stayed hidden, and the more I grew up, the more lost I became. The further I drifted away from myself, the more I sought change or escape. I wanted to be someone else, anyone else, because I didn't understand who I was. Because I'm naturally forward-thinking, I kept projecting into the future. Who do I want to be? Where am I going? What's the bigger version of me I can grow into? But no matter how much I planned or imagined, none of it landed. I'd chase goals, try on identities, and still feel the same emptiness. Eventually, I realized why. I was building futures on top of a mask, and a future built on a mask can only ever feel unstable. The breakthrough came when I stopped chasing who I wanted to be and turned back instead, back to the version of myself I had denied. The parts I buried, silenced, or convinced myself were too much. I realized I didn't need to grow into her like some distant future identity. I had to choose her, learn her, be her. Not as a project to improve, but as a home to return to. What I found wasn't some brand new identity I had to invent. It was already there, waiting for me. The change I experienced wasn't reinvention, it was discovery. Assimilation as survival. Early on, we learn which parts of us are rewarded and which get shut down. Loudness, softness, creativity, anger, joy. Anything that felt unsafe got cut off. Psychologists call this adaptation, shaping yourself to fit expectations. It isn't betrayal, it's survival. But the cost is steep. You stop being a person and start being a role. Why nothing stuck? New habits, goals, identities, they all failed, not from lack of effort, but because the foundation wasn't me. Real transformation doesn't come from the outside in. It comes from the inside out. The denied self as compass. The breakthrough came when I stopped chasing who I wanted to be and turned back to the version of myself I had denied. What I found wasn't foreign. It was familiar. I wasn't reinventing. I was remembering. Reinvention versus discovery. Reinvention is fueled by not enough. Discovery is fueled by reclaiming. Reinvention. Who do I need to become so I can feel whole? Discovery. Who have I always been beneath the masks? That's the difference between performance and integration. The core insight. Lasting change doesn't come from abandoning who you were. It comes from uncovering who you always were. The unhappiness came from living split. The discovery came from reuniting. Why self-hate runs deep. When people say they hate themselves, it's usually not the real self they're hating. It's the adapted self, the mask, the role, the compromises, the survival patterns. They hate the version of themselves that people pleases, freezes, explodes, or self-sabotages. They hate the life built out of choices made in fear. not freedom. They hate how small, powerless, or invisible they feel. But that isn't the authentic self. That's just the survival identity, the shell that got built to protect what was underneath. When you're in that place, the idea of becoming someone else is intoxicating. Reinvention feels like escape. If I just change everything, my body, my career, my personality, maybe I'll finally be free. But that kind of change usually doesn't last. Because the self you're trying to outrun is still there, buried underneath. That's why even after success, surgeries, moving cities, or new relationships, people can end up in the same emptiness. The truth is harder. The self you despise is not the whole picture. Beneath it, the authentic self is still intact, but buried. And the work is to reclaim it. Why discovery matters, even in self-hate. This is the paradox. If you hate yourself, it feels like the answer is to destroy yourself and become new. But what actually heals is realizing you've never met your whole self. Only the edited, silenced, survival version. Discovery means finding the self you never got to fully live. That's why when people reconnect with childhood joys, creativity, play, or long-buried traits, it can feel like meeting themselves for the first time. For someone stuck in self-hate, the process often looks like this. External reinvention comes first. A new job, a new routine, a new relationship. Sometimes you need to shake up your environment just to break the old cycles. That's not wrong. It creates breathing room. But if you stop there, the old dissatisfaction follows you. The deeper work is discovery. Asking, who am I beneath the shame, the adaptations, the compromises? What parts of me were never allowed to exist? That's the doorway to change that actually lasts. People who hate themselves aren't wrong to want change. But the change that heals isn't about swapping identities. It's about stripping away the false ones to uncover what was always there. Reinvention can be the starting point. Discovery is the finishing point. Reinvention versus discovery. When most of us think about change, we're usually talking about one of two things: reinvention or discovery. Both start with dissatisfaction, but they move in opposite directions. Reinvention is escape. It's fueled by shame, self-hate, or the desperation to finally feel like enough. It looks like adding more new habits, a new identity, a new life. At first, it feels exciting, even intoxicating. But because it's built on top of the same wounds and survival patterns, the relief never lasts. The mask changes shape, but the emptiness stays. Discovery is different. It isn't about escape, it's about return. Instead of piling on, discovery peels back. It asks you to face the parts you buried and reclaim them. It isn't glamorous. It can feel slow and uncomfortable at first, but it leads to real relief because it's built on authenticity instead of performance. Sometimes reinvention is the doorway. A new job, a new relationship, a new city can shake things loose. But if you stop there, the dissatisfaction follows you. Reinvention can spark movement, but discovery is what makes it last. The Prodigal Self. The parable of the prodigal son is often told as a story of sin and redemption, but it's just as much about identity. A son leaves home, convinced he'll find himself in faraway places. He spends years trying to build a life on what he thinks will satisfy him, only to realize he's further from himself than ever. When he finally turns back, expecting punishment or rejection, he finds something else: embrace, restoration, and homecoming. That's what change really is. We imagine change as reinvention, becoming someone new, erasing the old self. But just like the prodigal son, no matter how far you go, you can't outrun who you are. The parts you've denied don't disappear. They wait. And the moment you turn back toward them, they don't meet you with condemnation. They meet you with relief. Change doesn't mean becoming someone else. It means returning to the version of yourself you exiled, the one you buried because it felt too raw, too unsafe, too unacceptable. Real transformation isn't about invention. It's about remembrance. Not about adding more, but peeling back everything that is truly you, until what's left feels like home. The prodigal son's journey mirrors ours. The leaving, abandoning parts of ourselves to survive or assimilate. The wandering, chasing identities, habits, or masks that never quite land. The return, turning back toward the denied self, the one we thought we lost. The embrace, discovering that what we buried wasn't broken at all, only waiting for us. The story isn't about punishment. It's about return. And the return is where change begins.